Here we have this little part of history that I think is very interesting. I didn't know about this origins of the language, but this is something that is absolutely valuable to know and understand. This story calls 166 and all that. There is no doubt that today English is one of the most important and richest of the world's languages. Probably the most significant factor accounting for the latter quality was the conquest of England by Normans more than 900 years ago. The conquering Normans spoke French. Most of the inhabitants of the conquered nation spoke varieties of Anglo-Saxon and Germanic origin. Of course, the Normans were stronger than the local inhabitants politically, and naturally their language became the language of the king's court. It also became the language for written documents together with Latin, and was generally regarded as more more literary and somehow better than the language of the common people. In spite of apparently being worse, however, the language of the ordinary inhabitants of England, and more especially the language spoken by inhabitants of the central part of the country, did not die out. For centuries, the two languages continued to exist side by side. The individual most responsible for bringing them together, and one of the greatest writers in English literature, was custom official who lived in the late 14th century named Geoffrey Chaucer. Chaucer, whose Canterbury Tales is one of the most extraordinary works in English, practically created or at least made acceptable a new language, which was a combination of the more elegant French and the cruder but more powerful Germanic elements. Since Chaucer's time, the two languages have been woven closer and closer together, forming the single language that we now know as English. However, even today, vestiges of the differences survive. For words of French or Latin origin still tend to occur more frequently in formal written English than in spoken English. This naturally means that for Spanish speakers it's often easier to understand written English than spoken English. You can find evidence of this in this paragraph. Go through it and underline the words which are similar to words in Spanish. It is virtually certain that these will be words of Latin or Greek or French derivation, and probably they were brought to England by William the Conqueror and his men long ago. One clear example of the dual origins of English is to be found in the ways comparatives and superlatives of adjectives are formed. Adjectives of one syllable, usually of Germanic origin, form comparatives and superlatives by addition of suffixes er, est, as in German. There are 9 examples of such forms in this passage. On the other hand, longer adjectives tend to be derived from French or Latin and form their comparatives and superlatives in the same way as in Spanish, of course, through the addition of words preceding the adjectives more, most, which itself remains unchanged. Can you find the 8 examples of such forms in this passage? Do you find the second type easier or more difficult to understand than the first?